I trusted my wife with my life, but everything shattered when I caught her in our bedroom with my cousin, and the worst part was realizing that my mother-in-law had been covering up their affair behind my back the entire time. I was inside her when my phone lit up with my daughter's goodnight text, and that's when I knew I'd become the kind of man I used to despise. Love you, Daddy, Mom says you're working late again. Sarah, my coworker, didn't notice me freeze. She was too busy pulling me closer, whispering how much better she understood me than my wife ever could. 3 months earlier, I would have deleted her number after she'd touched my arm at the office Christmas party and said my wife was lucky. 3 months earlier, I still deserved my family. It started with the stupidest excuse every cheater tells themselves: my marriage had gotten stale. Lisa and I had been together 12 years, married for 9, and somewhere between the second kid and the third promotion, we'd become roommates who happened to share a mortgage. She'd gained weight after our son was born. I'd started staying late at the office to avoid the chaos of bedtime routines. We had maybe once a month, usually quick and mechanical, both of us going through the motions like we were checking off a chore. I told myself I deserved more passion, more excitement, more appreciation for everything I provided. Sarah was 28, 7 years younger than me, with no kids and a laugh that made me feel like I was 25 again. She'd started at the firm in September, and by October, we were having lunch together every day. She'd listen to me complain about Lisa's nagging, about how she didn't understand the pressure I was under at work, about how she'd let herself go. Sarah would touch my hand and tell me I deserved someone who saw how amazing I was. I ate it up like a starving man, never once considering that Lisa had given up her career to raise our children, that her body had changed growing the two people I claimed to love most in the world. The first time we kissed was in my car after a client dinner in November. I'd had 3 whiskeys, and Sarah had worn this black dress that made it impossible to think about anything else. She'd been talking about how her ex never appreciated her ambition, and I'd said something about understanding exactly how that felt. Then she was leaning across the center console, and I was pulling her toward me, and for 30 seconds I felt more alive than I had in years. I drove home that night and held my sleeping wife, promising myself it would never happen again. But promises from liars mean nothing, especially the ones we make to ourselves. By December, I was texting Sarah constantly, deleting the messages before I got home. I'd changed her name in my phone to Steve, work, and turned off message previews. I bought a separate credit card for our lunches and told Lisa I'd gotten a new gym membership to explain the mysterious charges and the occasional late-night workout. Every lie required 3 more to maintain it, and I became an expert at keeping my story straight. The first time we had it was in her apartment on January 15th. I'd told Lisa I had a conference in Boston, even created a fake email confirmation to show her. Instead, I spent 2 days in Sarah's bed, ordering takeout and pretending I was a different person, someone without a mortgage and soccer practices and a wife who trusted me completely. Sarah would trace her fingers across my chest and tell me how incredible I was, how she'd never felt this way about anyone, how it must be fate that we'd found each other. I was by the fantasy of it all. What kind of man looks at his 8-year-old daughter over breakfast and lies about where he'd been the night before? What kind of father teaches his 5-year-old son to ride a bike on Saturday, then sneaks away during nap time to sext another woman? I became that man so gradual that I didn't recognize the monster in the mirror. Every Sunday, Lisa would pack us all into the minivan for church, and I'd sit there in the pew, holding her hand, singing hymns, all while planning my next excuse to see Sarah. My friends noticed I was different. Tom asked if everything was okay at home when I bailed on poker night for the 3rd month in a row. My brother mentioned I seemed distracted at our dad's birthday dinner. But I was riding high on the dopamine of new desire, convinced I was smarter than every cheater who'd come before me. I had it all figured out. I could have my stable family life and my exciting affair. I deserved both, didn't I? I worked 70-hour weeks. I paid for the house, the cars, and the private school tuition. Didn't I deserve to feel wanted? The night my daughter texted me, Sarah and I were at a hotel downtown. I'd told Lisa I was at a client emergency that would run late. Lisa had sounded tired on the phone, and mentioned that our son had been asking why Daddy was gone so much lately. I'd promised to make it up to them with a trip to Disney World in the summer, already spending the money I'd mentally allocated for guilt relief. After I'd hung up, Sarah had pulled me toward the bed, unbuttoning my shirt, telling me to forget about everything else. For 2 hours, I did. But then that text came through. Love you, Daddy, Mom says you're working late again. My 8-year-old's innocent words, trusting completely in the father she believed I was. Sarah was kissing my neck, but all I could see was Emma's face from that morning when I'd promised to help with her science project. I'd forgotten, of course. Too busy thinking about what excuse I'd use to see Sarah that night. I pushed Sarah away, mumbling something about needing to go. She looked confused, and asked if it was something she'd done. I couldn't even look at her as I got dressed. The drive home was the longest of my life. Every red light gave me more time to think about what I'd become. I'd turned into every cliché, every stereotype of a middle-aged man destroying his family for someone younger and more exciting. But Sarah wasn't more excited. She was just new. She didn't know that I left my socks next to the bed or that I got cranky when my favorite team lost. She hadn't held my hand through my mother's cancer diagnosis or stayed up all night with me when Emma had pneumonia at age 3. She was a fantasy, and I'd been willing to torch my reality for it. I sat in my driveway for 20 minutes, staring at the house I'd built my life in. The kitchen light was still on. Lisa always left it on when I worked late, along with a plate of dinner wrapped in the microwave. Through the window, I could see the kids' artwork on the refrigerator, Emma's honor roll certificate, and Tommy's kindergarten handprint painting. This was real. This was what mattered. And I was destroying it for orgasms and ego strokes from someone who didn't even know my middle name. But I didn't stop. That's the thing about affairs that no one tells you. Even when you know it's wrong, even when the guilt is eating you alive, the addiction to the high is stronger than your conscience. I became an expert at compartmentalizing. There was work me, who met Sarah for lunch meetings that lasted 2 hours. There was family me who coached Tommy's t-ball team and helped Emma with her homework. And there was real me, the hollow man who existed in the space between the lies, growing emptier with each deception. By March, Sarah was pushing for more. She wanted to go away for a weekend. She wanted to meet my friends. She started talking about her lease being up in June, maybe finding a place closer to my office. I'd never promised her anything beyond what we had, but she'd built her own fantasy, one where I'd leave Lisa and we'd start fresh. When I tried to pump the brakes, she'd cry and ask if she meant anything to me at all. The irony was crushing. I was lying to 2 women now, letting both believe in futures that couldn't exist. Lisa knew something was wrong. She'd started asking more questions about my schedule, checking our credit card statements more carefully. Once, she'd even driven by the office when I'd said I was working late. I'd been there that night, but the close call made me paranoid. I started accusing her of not trusting me, turning my guilt into anger at her suspicion. We'd fight about nothing, and I'd storm out, using her unreasonableness as an excuse to text Sarah. I was gaslighting my wife to maintain my affair, and I convinced myself she was the one being difficult. The worst part was watching it affect our kids. Emma became clingy, always asking if Daddy was coming home for dinner. Tommy started having nightmares, crawling into our bed at 3 a.m. Lisa would hold him, whispering that everything was okay, while I lay there, knowing I was the monster in his dreams, even if he didn't know it yet. Family movie nights became tense affairs, with Lisa and me barely speaking while the kids pretended not to notice. Emma started making excuses not to have friends over, embarrassed by the Arctic chill between her parents. I should have ended it with Sarah a dozen times. After Emma's spring recital, when she looked for me in the audience and I'd been late because I'd been saying goodbye to Sarah in the parking lot. After Tommy's birthday party, Lisa had done everything alone because I'd claimed a work emergency that was Sarah crying about us never having a real future. After our anniversary dinner, when Lisa had worn the dress I'd loved and tried to reconnect, but all I could think about was Sarah's text asking if I was thinking about her. But I didn't end it. Not until everything else ended first. The beginning of the end came on a Thursday in April, though I wouldn't recognize it until later. Sarah had been increasingly unstable, calling me at all hours, showing up at the office when I'd said I needed space. She'd started following Lisa on Instagram through a fake account, making comments about how lucky she was to have such a devoted husband. The sarcasm in those comments made me uncold. I was juggling dynamite, and the fuses were getting shorter. That Thursday, Lisa had surprised me at work with lunch. She'd never done that before in 9 years of marriage. She'd walked into my office carrying takeout from my favorite Thai place, wearing a sundress I hadn't seen in years, trying to smile through whatever suspicion was eating at her. Sarah had been in my office 5 minutes earlier, and I'd practically shoved her out the back door when I'd seen Lisa at reception through my glass wall. My secretary's face told me she knew exactly what was happening. The whole office probably knew. I thought we could talk, Lisa had said, unpacking pad thai like it was a peace offering. The kids are at school, and I miss you. I miss us. She'd looked so vulnerable, so desperate to fix something she didn't even understand was broken. I'd sat there, eating noodles that tasted like cardboard, lying about how busy things had been with the Johnson account. She'd reached for my hand across the desk, and I'd noticed she'd had her nails done. Lisa never got her nails done. She was trying so hard to win back a husband who'd already betrayed her 100 times over. After she'd left, Sarah had stormed back in, furious about being hidden like a dirty secret. We'd argued in whispers, aware that the entire office was probably listening. She'd accused me of stringing her along, of using her while never intending to leave my wife. The truth in her words made me cruel. I'd told her she knew what this was from the beginning, that I'd never promised her anything. She'd looked at me like I'd slapped her, then said the words that should have terrified me, "Your wife deserves to know what kind of man she married." I'd spent the rest of the day in damage control mode, sending Sarah flowers, texting apologies, promising we'd talk about our future soon. All lies, but I was so deep in them that they came as naturally as breathing. I bought Lisa flowers too, different ones, and made sure to come home on time for once. We'd had dinner as a family, and I'd helped with homework and bedtime, playing the role of devoted father like I was auditioning for my own life. That night, Lisa had tried to initiate for the first time in months. She'd come to bed in lingerie I didn't even know she owned, nervous and self-conscious, trying to seduce her husband. I'd responded, but it was mechanical, guilty, my mind elsewhere. Afterward, she'd curled into me and whispered, "I love you. Whatever's wrong, we can fix it. Just please don't leave us." I'd told her she was imagining things, that everything was fine. Another lie to add to the pile that was crushing us both. The next few weeks were a special kind of. Sarah became increasingly erratic, showing up at places she knew I'd be with my family. Once at Emma's soccer game, sitting 3 rows behind us, texting me about how cute my kids were and how it was a shame they'd grow up with a liar for a father. Another time at the grocery store, appearing in the cereal aisle while Tommy was begging for Lucky Charms, making small talk with Lisa about how we must work together since she'd seen me at the office so much. Lisa had been polite but suspicious, asking me later how well I knew that woman from the store. I was unraveling. I'd lost 15 pounds from the stress, and started drinking every night just to sleep. My work was suffering. I'd missed 2 important client meetings because I'd been dealing with Sarah's meltdowns. My boss had called me in for a conversation about my focus and whether everything was okay at home. The irony of his concern almost made me laugh. Nothing was okay anywhere. May arrived with a new level of desperation for both women. Lisa had suggested couples counseling, presenting it as a way to strengthen our already good marriage. I'd agreed, thinking it might throw her off the scent, not realizing I'd have to sit in a room every week and lie to a professional who was trained to spot exactly what I was doing. Sarah, meanwhile, had given me an ultimatum: tell Lisa by the end of the month or she would. I'd tried to break it off with Sarah then, meeting her at a coffee shop to end things properly. She'd cried, begged, then turned vicious, listing every promise I'd made, every I love you I'd whispered in the dark. She'd recorded some of our conversations, she said. Screenshots of every text. Photos from our hotel nights. She wasn't just going to tell Lisa if I left her. She was going to destroy me. The 28-year-old I'd thought was so mature and understanding had turned into exactly what she was, a young woman who'd believed the lies of an older married man and was now demanding payment for her pain. I considered telling Lisa myself, controlling the narrative. But every time I looked at her, at our kids, at the life we'd built, I couldn't form the words. How do you tell someone who trusts you completely that you've been lying to their face for 6 months? How do you explain that their intuition was right, that every you're being paranoid was gaslighting, that every I love you was tainted with guilt from loving someone else hours earlier? The therapy sessions were. Dr. Martinez would ask about communication, intimacy, and trust. Lisa would cry about feeling disconnected, about how I'd become a stranger. I'd sit there, nodding, agreeing to try harder, to be more present, all while knowing I was going to meet Sarah after each session. The therapist knew. I could see it in her eyes, the way she'd probe about work stress and whether there were any external factors affecting our marriage. But I was paying her $200 an hour to save a marriage I was actively destroying, so she played along with my charade. Emma knew something was wrong, too. She'd started asking questions no 8-year-old should have to ask. Are you and mommy getting divorced? Why don't you kiss anymore? Is it my fault you're always at work? I'd assure her everything was fine, that mommy and daddy loved each other and her and Tommy more than anything. But kids aren't. They know when you're lying, even if they don't understand why. The breaking point came on Memorial Day weekend. We'd gone to Lisa's parents' lake house, a tradition we'd maintained for years. I'd promised Sarah I'd end things with her when we got back, just needed this last weekend to figure out how. She'd agreed but insisted on one last night before I left. That night had turned into her sobbing, clinging to me, saying she couldn't live without me. I'd left at 3 a.m., speeding home to pack for the lake, telling Lisa I'd had to finish a report for Tuesday. At the lake, surrounded by Lisa's family, watching our kids play with their cousins, I'd felt like a ghost haunting my own life. Lisa's father had pulled me aside and told me how proud he was of the man I'd become, the father I was, the husband who took care of his little girl. Lisa's mother had hugged me and whispered that she was so glad Lisa had found someone faithful and true, not like her first boyfriend, who'd cheated. I'd smiled and accepted their praise, knowing I was worse than anyone they could imagine. That Saturday night, Lisa and I had walked down to the dock after the kids were asleep. The moon was full, reflecting off the water like a spotlight on my sins. She'd leaned against me, and for a moment, it felt like before. Before Sarah. Before the lies. Before I'd ruined everything. She'd started talking about the future, about Emma starting high school in a few years, about Tommy's talent for baseball, about maybe trying for a third child. I know things have been hard, she'd said, but I believe in us. We're going to make it through whatever this is. I'd almost told her then. Almost confessed everything under that bright moon with the lake as our witness. But then she'd kissed me, soft and trusting, and said, I'm so lucky to have you. You'd never me like other men have women I know. The words had frozen in my throat. I'd kissed her back and made love to her on that dock like we were teenagers again, all while knowing I was already dead to her, she just didn't know it yet. The drive home on Monday was silent. Lisa had attributed it to post-vacation blues. The kids had slept most of the way. I'd spent 5 hours thinking about how to end things with Sarah without detonating my life. I'd crafted a plan. I'd give her money to move away, help her find a job in another city, make it worth her while to disappear. It was cowardly and probably wouldn't work, but it was all I had. I'd texted Sarah that we needed to talk, that I'd come by Tuesday after work. She'd responded with heart emojis and I knew you'd choose us. My stomach had turned. There was no us with Sarah. There had never been. She was a symptom of my selfishness, not a cure for it. But I'd created this monster, fed it with promises and passion, and now it was ready to devour everything I'd tried to protect. Tuesday morning was normal. Terrifyingly normal. Lisa had made pancakes. Tommy had syrup in his hair. Emma had complained about a math test. I'd kissed them all goodbye, told them I loved them, not knowing it was the last morning I'd ever wake up in that house as a family man. The last morning they'd look at me with trust instead of betrayal. The last morning I'd be daddy instead of the man who destroyed our family. I never made it to Sarah's apartment that Tuesday. At 2 p.m., while I was in a meeting about quarterly projections, my phone had exploded with texts from Lisa. Just one word, repeated, how? Then why? Then come home. Now. My secretary had knocked on the conference room door, her face pale, saying my wife was on the phone and it was an emergency. I'd known before I even picked up the receiver. The emergency was me. Sarah had sent everything to Lisa's work email that morning. Every photo, every text, every recorded conversation where I'd called my wife boring, where I'd said Sarah made me feel alive, where I'd promised to leave my family when the time was right. She'd been thorough, creating a timeline of my lies, matching them against Lisa's calendar. Every client dinner that was really a date. Every conference that was a night in Sarah's bed. Every gym session that was afternoon. 6 months of deception, packaged and delivered with surgical precision. The drive home was surreal. Other people were living their normal lives, going to work, picking up groceries, while my world was ending. I'd tried calling Lisa back, but she wouldn't answer. I'd texted Sarah, begging to know why she'd done this. Her response was simple, you promised me a future. Now you have none. I'd pulled over twice too, my body rejecting the truth of what I'd done as my mind had been rejecting it for months. Lisa's car was in the driveway, but her parents' car was there too. Through the window, I could see her mother holding her while she sobbed at the kitchen table. Her father stood by the door like a sentry, and when I walked in, he looked at me with such disgust that I actually stepped back. The kids are at my house, he said quietly. You're going to pack a bag and leave. Now. It wasn't a request. Lisa looked up at me then, and I've never seen such devastation in someone's eyes. Her face was swollen from crying, makeup streaked down her cheeks, but it was the confusion that killed me. Like she was looking at a stranger wearing her husband's face. I don't understand, she whispered. I gave you everything. I gave up my career. I had your children. I supported your dreams. I trusted you with my whole heart. Why wasn't I enough? There was no answer that would matter. No explanation that would help. Her father had moved toward me then, and I'd left quickly, throwing my bag in the car and driving away from the life I'd demolished. I'd ended up at a motel off the highway, the kind that rents by the hour, fitting for what I'd become. I'd sat on the questionable bedspread and called Sarah, needing someone to blame besides myself. She hadn't answered. She'd already blocked my number. The woman I'd destroyed my family for had vanished the moment she'd achieved her revenge. The next days were a blur of consequences. Lisa had been thorough with her lawyer, having documentation of every penny I'd spent on Sarah, every lie I'd told, every family event I'd missed. In our state, infidelity affected custody arrangements. I'd get every other weekend and one dinner a week. From full-time father to part-time visitor, all for someone who'd already moved on to destroy someone else's life. But nothing prepared me for telling the children. Lisa had insisted we do it together, for their sake. We'd sat them down in what used to be our living room, and I'd watched their faces change as we explained Daddy would be living somewhere else. Emma, always too smart for her age, had immediately asked, is it because of that woman from the grocery store? Lisa and I had exchanged looks, realizing she'd known more than we'd thought. Kids always do. Tommy had just cried, asking if it was his fault, if he'd been bad, if he could fix it. 5 years old and already blaming himself for his father's sins. I'd held him, telling him it was never his fault, that Daddy had made mistakes, that I loved him more than anything. But how do you explain to a kindergartner that love isn't always enough when actions destroy everything love is supposed to protect? Emma's reaction was worse. She'd gone cold, quiet, staring at me like she was memorizing my face. Finally, she'd asked, did you ever love us? Or were we just pretending to be a family? I'd assured her I loved them always, but she'd shaken her head. If you loved us, you wouldn't have done this. You wouldn't have picked someone else over us. 8 years old and already understanding betrayal better than I had at 35. The divorce proceedings were swift and brutal. Lisa had hired a pitbull lawyer who'd found evidence of expenses I'd forgotten about. The credit card I'd hidden, the hotel charges, the jewelry I'd bought Sarah for Valentine's Day while telling Lisa we needed to save money. Every transaction was another nail in my coffin. The judge had looked at me with barely concealed contempt as he'd awarded Lisa the house, primary custody, and substantial alimony and child support. I'd walked out financially ruined and morally bankrupt. Word had spread quickly through our social circles. Friends chose sides, and it wasn't mine they chose. Tom called me to say I wasn't welcome at poker nights anymore. I can't have you around my wife, he'd said simply. If you could do this to Lisa, I don't trust you. My brother had been more direct, you're a piece of, and I'm embarrassed to be related to you. Even my parents had been horrified, my mother crying about how she'd raised me better, my father saying he'd never been more disappointed in anyone. At work, the atmosphere was arctic. Sarah had sent emails to several colleagues before she'd quit, detailing our affair and painting herself as a victim of my manipulation. HR had called me in for a meeting about appropriate workplace conduct. While I hadn't technically broken any rules, the damage to my reputation was irreversible. Clients had started requesting different account managers. My boss had suggested I might be happier elsewhere. I'd been with the firm for 10 years, and in 6 months, I destroyed that too. The first weekend with the kids was agony. I'd rented a small apartment with 2 bedrooms, trying to make it feel like their favorite snacks and new bedding with their favorite characters. But Emma had looked around and said, "This is where you live now because you love someone else more than us." Tommy had refused to sleep in his new bed, crying for mommy all night. I'd sat on the floor of his room at 3 a.m., watching him finally sleep, wondering how I'd become the villain in my children's story. Lisa started dating someone in August, just 3 months after our separation. A man from her gym, someone who'd been interested for years but respected that she was married. Unlike me, he'd waited until she was available. Emma had told me about him during my dinner visit, how he was teaching Tommy to throw a curveball, how he'd helped with her science project, how he made mommy smile again. Every word was a knife, but I had no right to bleed. The worst moment came at Emma's fall parent-teacher conference. Lisa and I had attended together, trying to present a united front. Her teacher had pulled us aside afterward, concerned about Emma's recent behavior. She'd been withdrawn, her grades dropping, getting into arguments with friends. She wrote an essay about trust, the teacher had said gently, about how once it's broken, it can never really be fixed. It was beautifully written but heartbreaking. She's processing something painful. Lisa and I had sat in the parking lot afterward, not speaking, both crying for the innocence we'd stolen from our daughter. Finally, Lisa had said, "She used to be so happy. So confident. Now she questions everything, trusts no one. You didn't just break us. You broke her ability to believe in love." She'd driven away, leaving me sitting there, finally understanding that infidelity doesn't just destroy marriages. It destroys children's foundations, their ability to trust, and their belief in love itself. By October, Sarah had reached out once more. A single email saying she was sorry for how things had ended, that she'd been and had lashed out, that she hoped I'd found peace. I'd stared at that email for hours, marveling at how someone could destroy lives and then apologize like she'd merely forgotten to return a borrowed book. I deleted it without responding. There was nothing to say to someone who'd been willing to burn down a family for attention from a man who'd never truly been available. November brought the final papers. Our divorce was official. 9 years of marriage reduced to a stack of documents dividing assets and scheduling custody. Lisa had kept her composure through the brief courthouse procedure, but I'd seen her hands shaking as she'd signed. When it was over, she'd looked at me one last time and said, "I hope she was worth it." Then she'd walked away, her heels clicking on the marble floor, each step taking her further from the disaster I'd created. I'd sat in my car outside the courthouse, finally alone with the truth. Sarah hadn't been worth it. She'd never been worth even a moment of what I'd lost. The excitement, the passion, the escape she'd represented, it had all been a mirage. What was real was the family I'd had, the wife who'd loved me, the children who'd trusted me, the life we'd built together. And I'd burned it all down for someone who'd forgotten my name the moment she'd gotten her revenge. The holidays are coming now, and I'll spend them alone in my apartment, allowed to see my kids for a few hours on Christmas Day before returning them to their real home, where another man will help them open presents and create new traditions. Emma barely speaks to me anymore, communicating in single-word answers and avoiding eye contact. Tommy still loves me with the pure heart of a 6-year-old, but even he's starting to understand that daddy is someone who causes mommy pain. Last week, I saw Lisa at the grocery store, the same one where Sarah had ambushed us months ago. She was with her new boyfriend, laughing at something he'd said, her hand on his arm. She looked lighter, younger, happier than she'd looked in the last year of our marriage. When she saw me, the light dimmed for a moment, but then she simply nodded and moved on. I'd stood there with my basket of microwave dinners, watching the life I'd thrown away continue without me. People ask if I regret it, as if there's any other possible emotion. Regret doesn't begin to cover the magnitude of what I feel. It's a crushing, suffocating understanding that I had everything and chose nothing. That I was loved completely, and decided it wasn't enough. That I held my children's trust in my hands and crushed it for orgasms with someone whose last name I'm already starting to forget. There's no redemption arc here. No lesson learned that makes it worthwhile. No silver lining or personal growth that justifies the destruction. I'm just a man sitting in a one-bedroom apartment, eating cereal for dinner, scrolling through photos of the family I used to have, understanding that some mistakes can't be fixed, some trust can't be rebuilt, and some men don't deserve the families they destroy.